There's evidence of obsession. You're fascinated with
It's
me.
not only from my side, so don't try to make this.
No one's saying that. It takes
She's not here to defend herself right now,
obviously
so we
she's
gotta talk to
missing.
you.
So we're talking to you, who've been going
completely
back and
respect
forth
that. I
on
understand
text.
that. That is your family.
Right.
But until we figure out what's going on, just don't beat me up.
Nobody's beating you
If I'm
up.
guilty,
But
why
you
would I
put
come
yourself in the...
She repeatedly rejected a co-worker's advances, and police say it cost Nicole Hammond her life. She was shot and killed in the parking lot outside the warehouse where she worked.
Police in St. Cloud say angry text messages sent by a co-worker just hours before her death led officers to the man now charged with killing her.
That man is in custody and is now being called a person of interest. But so far, UIC are not saying if they believe they've arrested the suspected killer. What is clear is that many of the 33,000 students on Chicago's largest college campus are unnerved.
The final autopsy report in the murder of Miya Marcano was released tonight. It says the 19-year-old died of homicide by undetermined means and confirms she was the victim of an assault. Investigators say Marcano was abducted in September. Her body was found at the Timberscan Apartments in Orlando on October 2nd.
This is a story of a young woman who was murdered after she told a man no. Her story is one that enraged many people throughout the nation, but unfortunately, the harassment she had to endure from someone who refused to take no for an answer is something that a lot of women around the world can relate to.
Final autopsy report says her remains were nearly completely skeletonized, so no specific cause of death could be found. The only suspect in Marcano's death, Armando Caballero, was found dead from an apparent suicide.
This is the case of Miya Marcano, a 19-year-old woman who grew up in Pembroke, Florida. Miya was a bright and bubbly person whose magnetic personality made everyone want to be around her. She was known to be an incredibly loyal friend and someone who loved adventure. Some of her favorite pastimes included going to festivals and fairs where she could share good food and make fun memories with those closest to her. Miya also greatly loved her family. Even though her parents divorced when she was younger, she remained close to them. She was also close with her stepmother, Giselle, who played a major role in her life. Miya shared a special bond with her younger brother, Marlon Jr., whom she called Munchie.
Miya is a family person. When she was born, she was basically the star of the family. Everybody kind of gravitated to her. This spirit and this energy that made everybody fall in love with her.
Those who knew Miya knew that she wasn't the type of person to just disappear and not tell anyone where she was going. She would always return text messages and phone calls and made a point to stay closely connected to her friends and family. So in September of 2021, after failing to get in touch with anyone and seemingly disappearing from her apartment complex, it became clear that something was terribly wrong with this young woman. Miya lived in the Arden Villas apartment complex, which is located in Orlando, Florida. When she moved in, she knew that it was affordable and it was close to her job. It was a well-regarded complex that was close to the UCF campus and full of college students. It seemed like the right fit for her, but tragically, she never could have imagined the terrors that she would have to experience while living there.
I'm calling to find out if I can have a wellness check, please.
How was this even able to happen? How did they let this happen?
A $15,000 reward is being offered for information that can lead to Miya Marcano.
There's absolute anger. That just makes the situation even worse.
While Miya failed to return phone calls to friends and family, she was immediately reported as a missing person to law enforcement. But the cops did not treat the case with the level of urgency that her friends and family thought was called for.
There's absolute anger. That just makes the situation even worse.
Everybody that played a role in Mia's disappearance are going to be held accountable.
I was trying to fight back tears.
Miya is alive and she's suffering. I want my granddaughter home.
This story begins when Miya decides to attend college at UCF, making the Arden Villas apartment complex the perfect fit for her. She would later end up deciding to transfer to Valencia College, which was located close enough that she could continue living in the same apartment. And she also ended up getting a job working at the complex that would help to pay for some of her different expenses. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. Miya lived about an hour's flight away from the rest of her family, but she would never let too much time pass before going back for a visit. On September 21st of 2021, that's what she was planning on doing. She was going to fly back home to stay for the weekend, but sadly, things weren't going to go as she had planned.
So Miya's at work at Arden Villas. She's about to get off, It's almost 5 p.m. and she has a flight to catch to Fort Lauderdale, which is where some of her family members live, but she never boarded that flight. And that's when her parents get extra worried because they know something is wrong.
In this snapshot that is taken from surveillance footage, you can see Miya with her overnight bag slung over her shoulder as she got ready to catch her flight. But later that day, she never sent her family a text message to tell them that she had arrived at the airport and was getting ready to board. This was what ultimately set off the first alarm bells that something was not right. Miya's family was waiting at the airport for her to get off the plane and come meet them, but she never arrived. By the time that evening came and she still had not gotten in touch with anyone, they knew that something must have happened to her. So they called 911 and asked for a wellness check to be done on her at the Arden Villas apartment. A deputy went out a little after 10 p.m. that evening and arrived at her apartment, but he didn't find her. He looked around the entrance of the apartment to see if there were signs of a break-in, but didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Eventually, Miya's roommates returned to the apartment. They hadn't heard from Miya, but they unlocked the door to the apartment and allowed the deputy to come in and have a look around. They thought maybe Miya had been in her bedroom but just hadn't heard the knocking, so they went to the door and called out to her, but she didn't answer. Then they tried to open her door but found it locked from the inside. It didn't make sense that Miya would have locked her bedroom door when she wasn't even home. She had no reason to. When the deputy peered into the bedroom from another window, he found something even more strange. The small white bookshelf had been pushed under the doorknob so that the door couldn't be forced open, and her room, which was usually kept tidy, was a complete mess. All signs were pointing to the fact that something had happened to Miya inside that room. The deputy was able to climb into Miya's bedroom using a window, and that was when he was confronted with even more disturbing evidence. There were what appeared to be blood stains covering some of her pillows. But that's not all. Her bedding had been pulled off and her things were strewn across the floor. There were pieces of broken jewelry, and the overnight bag that she had planned to take with her on her flight was still there, sitting by her desk. It appeared that someone may have broken into the room and ambushed Miya sometime before she was about to leave for the airport. But who would do this? And how would they get in? Now, as you might have seen in a lot of apartment complexes, especially older ones, the locks that come with the unit are not always the best. Sometimes they've been used by many different people in the past and can be easily broken. But that was not the case for the locks that Miya had at her apartment because her dad had installed them himself. He wanted to be sure that his daughter was safe. But somehow, someone had managed to break through even these tough locks. Whoever it was had clearly really wanted to get Miya and must have come prepared with the tools to break in. So clearly, all signs pointed to foul play here. That would have been obvious to anyone who would have seen this scene. And yet, the deputy who had come and seen all of these things didn't notify the criminal investigation team. In fact, while he was still there at the apartment complex, he ended up going to check up on another call. He might not have been that worried about Miya's whereabouts, but her roommates were very concerned. They had a very good idea of someone who may have possibly tried to mess with Miya. His name was Armando Caballero, and he was a maintenance worker who was employed at Miya's apartment complex. He had shown interest in Miya, and even after she made it clear that his feelings weren't reciprocated, he wouldn't leave her alone. His continued persistence made her very uncomfortable, and she had talked to her friends about it. Other people had witnessed Armando's obsession with Miya. He apparently refused to just let her be. No matter how many times he asked her out and she told him no, he still kept trying. He would even cash app her money as a bribe, and she would immediately send it right back. The longer that this went on, the more worried Miya had supposedly been becoming. She was scared of Armando, and she was not alone. There were other women from her apartment complex who had also been harassed by him and notified the cops about it. There was one woman in particular who had her apartment vandalized after she had recently told Armando that she couldn't go out with him. She believed that he was the one who did the vandalizing, possibly in an attempt to scare her. She told the cops what happened, and they made a report, but apparently didn't think it was worth looking into further. So given all this information and the fact that Miya was now missing, it seems as if Armando should have been considered the #1 person for investigators to look into. Meanwhile, Mia's family caught a late-night flight to Orlando and immediately went to Mia's apartment to look for her. As soon as they got there, they came face to face with Armando, standing right outside her apartment. Understandably, they were suspicious. Miya had already told them all about Armando and his creepy behavior towards her. Check out this clip that they took of Armando hanging around outside of the apartment. He has no reason to be there. It was not his shift, yet he was seemingly keeping an eye on everything that was happening. Mia's friends and family confronted him. They asked him what he was doing there, and he claimed that a co-worker named Tati had told him that Miya was missing, but none of them had ever heard of someone with that name. But that's not the only suspicious thing. It is 4 in the morning at this point.
You keep mentioning Tati and no one knows Tati.
You get a call
The
all of a
roommates
sudden.
don't even know Tati.
You've been sleeping since
You
10
keep
o'clock,
saying
and all of a
Tati is
sudden
a
you're showing
friend.
up here at 4 o'clock in the morning
Because me
looking for
and
me.
Tati were conversating about it, so I finally, it came
Okay,
up.
but
Should I go
Tati
and
is
see if I
someone-
see anything?
No one knows Tati. That's my whole thing.
So, as you can tell, Mia's loved ones are already super suspicious of Armando, and they have good reason to be.
Not even the
Tati's
roommate
an
knows
employee
Tati.
here.
She's an employee, but you keep saying Tati is a friend and that you've all hung out together. No one here knows Tati. All her
Well,
other
not
friends
all
showed up. Her
these
closest
people.
friends that live in the complex were all here with us early on. No one knows Tati. Only you.
Could the real reason that Armando is there be because he was trying to keep an eye on the investigation and make it seem like he's cooperating with the cops? Maybe he thought he would look less suspicious that way, but so far, that's not working out very well for him. Mia's family members, who is recording this whole interaction, tell him that they know he's been harassing Miya and sending her obsessive texts, but he is ready to deny every allegation.
As of right now, you have
work
sent
tomorrow? You work
obsessive
tomorrow,
texts to
Tati?
Miya. We have all seen the texts. You talked about giving her your life savings. You cash out her money, and you claim that you weren't in touch.
Who told her gave
It's
her
on
life
text.
savings? I never
As a
said
matter of
that.
fact, we're going to get a police report to pull your phone records if that's the case.
Armando seems to try to make himself look better by suggesting that Miya was into him too, and that his feelings were actually reciprocated.
There's evidence of obsession. You're fascinated with
It's
me.
not only from my side, so don't try to make this
No
look
one,
like I'm a
no one's
stalker.
saying that. It takes
She's
two.
not here to defend
There's-
herself right now, so
obviously,
we
she's
gotta talk to
missing.
you.
So we're talking to
And
you,
I
who've been going
completely
back and
respect
forth
that. I
on
understand
text.
that. That is your family.
Right.
But until we figure out what's going on, just don't beat me up.
Nobody
one's
ain't beating
beating
you
you
up.
If I'm guilty, why
You
would I
put
come
yourself
here?
in the
That last sentence that Armando says is especially interesting because so far, at least based on what we've seen on camera, nobody has actually accused Armando of being the person behind Mia's disappearance. They've accused him of being obsessive and of not leaving her alone, but nothing more than that. But Armando is already being super self-conscious of how he's being perceived. He wants people to believe that the only reason he is there is because a person he calls a friend and a fellow employee is missing, and he's worried about her.
Why weren't you concerned hours ago?
I just found out. We didn't think it was serious. I don't even know how Tati found out. She
Somebody's
told me
missing and you don't think it's serious.
Someone
maybe they
that
hanging out. They got this place right here. They go downtown. I don't know. Maybe her phone's off. I don't know what she did.
she was supposed to show up for a flight and didn't show up.
After only briefly talking with Armando, detectives told him he could go. So he got in his car and left the complex. Meanwhile, others take a closer look into Armando's past and quickly find out that he has a criminal history. He was convicted of aggravated assault several years before this. He had also confessed discharging a weapon on school property at a local college and causing damage to one of the dorms. But still, detectives said that there wasn't enough evidence to detain Armando or even look into him further. It wasn't until outside law enforcement heard about the case and decided to launch a full investigation that it finally seemed like people were beginning to take Mia's disappearance seriously. Mia's family and friends had already begun to secretly watch Armando, and they had seen some things that they found found suspicious. One of these things was a pink blanket that they saw him carrying. They knew they had seen this blanket before.
The blanket.
Oh my God, that is my blanket.
So what was Armando doing with a blanket that Miya was borrowing from a friend? Had he taken it from her? Some believe that Armando was holding Miya somewhere against her will, and maybe going to visit her when he thought nobody was paying attention to him. Finally, after it had been about 24 hours since Miya had disappeared, a search warrant was approved for Armando's home, and he was officially declared a person of interest in the case. Everyone hoped this would be a turning point in the case, but not long after this, Armando too would disappear. It was believed that he was likely on the run, as evidence was starting to pile up against him behind the scenes.
It's been 3 long days since anyone has heard from Miya Marcano.
Miya, baby girl, if you can hear me, if you're seeing me, we're here.
A desperate plea to bring 19-year-old Miya Marcano home. Her family hopeful that she's alive and okay.
An important piece of evidence would be a key fob needed to access Miya's apartment. Cops knew that a key fob had been used to access her apartment just 3 hours before she was last seen on surveillance footage the day she disappeared. But it wasn't Miya who had accessed the key fob, and it wasn't one of her roommates. But guess who another person who had access to a key fob that would unlock Miya's apartment? Because of his job at the complex, Armando did. Detectives are able to piece together that Armando had gone into Miya's apartment before she had gotten home. He was likely hiding in her bedroom waiting for her to return. Later, when Miya stopped by her apartment to grab the bag she was going to take to the airport, he ambushed her. Cops have enough evidence to now finally arrest Armando. But there's one problem. Nobody has a clue where he is. Eventually, law enforcement is able to track down Armando, but it is not in the way that they had hoped.
And we continue to follow that breaking news in the case of a missing college student, Miya Marcano. The family began their search this morning near her apartment in Orange County, where she was last seen. But halfway through the day, they moved to Longwood in Seminole County, where the body of that person of interest was found.
In a shocking twist, Armando had taken his own life before they had found him. This was a hard pill to swallow, because now Armando could not tell Miya's family what he had done with her. But nevertheless, they said that they would not give up until they found Miya.
It was an emotional gathering Sunday evening. Friends and family of Miya Marcano tried to comfort each other at the Arden Villas apartments, where she was last seen.
And all we ask you is to help us bring Miya home, bring her home safe. Just drop her off and let us know where she is. We'll pick her up. Just bring her home.
They were sure that someone had to have seen or heard something.
Maybe you saw something, you heard something. And if you can hear me and it's causing this much commotion in your life outside the door, when it was happening to her or him, you should have heard something then too.
Finally, on October 2nd of 2021, the search for Miya came to a heartbreaking end. The young woman's body was located in a wooded area near another apartment complex. Her hands and feet had been bound with duct tape, and more was placed over her mouth. She was wearing a bra, a robe, and a pair of jeans. Unfortunately, at this point, her remains had been skeletized. This meant that officials were not able to determine what had been her official cause of death. We know only that she was murdered, and that Armando was the one who did this to her. In the months following Miya's tragic murder, law enforcement faced a lot of criticism because many felt that they had not investigated her disappearance properly from the very beginning. Her family eventually filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Orange County Sheriff's Office and the Arden Villas apartment complex for negligence. They hope that Miya's story will inspire change and encourage other people who may be experiencing harassment to reach out for help and do whatever it takes to be heard. Do you believe Miya Marcano's death could have been prevented if law enforcement had paid more attention to Armando from the beginning? Let us know what you think in the comments.
This tape blocks off a crime scene in a UIC parking garage where officers are now telling us a 19-year-old student was found shackled Saturday morning in the back seat of her car.
I think it's really terrible and scary.
Say Ruth George entered the Halstead Street parking garage at about 1:35 a.m. Saturday morning. She was alone, but UIC say a man entered the garage shortly after the sophomore kinesiology student.
When a lot of girls are young, they are taught that if they are receiving unwanted advances like catcalls, it's just best to ignore them. But as many women know, sometimes ignoring the catcalls is not enough. This is the story of Ruth George, a 19-year-old kinesiology student who was attending the University of Illinois in Chicago. She had big dreams for her future, but tragically, she never got the chance to reach those dreams because her life was stolen from her by a man who didn't want to be ignored.
That man is in custody and is now being called a person of interest. But so far, UIC are not saying if they believe they've arrested the suspected killer. What is clear is that many of the 33,000 students on Chicago's largest college campus are unnerved.
In November of 2019, Ruth got out of a Lyft outside of a parking garage after spending time with a friend. She was alone while she made her way through that parking garage and back to her car. While she was walking, she caught the eye of a 26-year-old man with a long and violent criminal history. His name is Donald D. Thurman. Donald thought Ruth was attractive, and so he called her and tried to get her attention. But Ruth kept her head down and ignored him as she quickly walked to her car. This made Donald angry. When he approached her and she continued to ignore him, he grabbed her from behind and violently forced her into the back seat of her own car. It was there that he assaulted and murdered her.
George's mom and sister were worried too when they didn't hear from their loved one. They called and traced Ruth's cell phone to the garage. At 11:15 Saturday morning, found her body in the back seat of the car. Paramedics were called, but nothing could be done for the young student.
Luckily, the surveillance footage gathered from the parking garage and nearby bus stop was enough evidence to prove that Donald was the one responsible for this unspeakably evil act.
The horrific crime starts here. UIC police say Donald Thurman gets off the UIC Halstead Blue Line. That's him in the white puffy coat. Don't forget the jacket. It's a huge piece of evidence for detectives. Thurman makes his way up the ramp and out the doors to Halstead. He heads for Taylor Street, where around the same time UIC sophomore Ruth George and a friend are getting out of a Lyft. They go separate ways. George heads for her car parked in a nearby campus garage.
While watching this footage and knowing what is about to happen next, it's hard not to want to reach out through the screen and help this young woman. Ruth knew that she was alone in this moment and that there wasn't anyone there to come to her aid.
Thurman is seen on a series of cameras. Here, surveillance video from inside a campus building shows him walking by. And on another, you can see him moments before police say he kills. Prosecutors say Thurman catcalled and tried talking to George during the walk. She ignored it.
Donald was arrested and charged with both Ruth's murder and her assault. Law enforcement say he had no ties to the university and had never even met Ruth before. He simply saw an opportunity to prey upon someone and took it. Ruth's loved ones demanded that justice be done. They say that all she ever wanted to do was make the world a better place.
Justice for a teen who wanted to follow her mom and sister into the healthcare profession so that she too could help people. Now those she leaves behind are left to wonder why, sadly, no one was around to help her during her time of need.
Records show that Donald has not yet gone to trial, but due to DNA evidence, it's hard to imagine the possibility of him not being convicted. Most likely, he will be spending the rest of his life behind bars for what he did to this young woman. What sort of punishment do you think would be true justice for the man who treated Ruth like a toy he could play with and dispose of however he wanted? Let us know what you think.
She repeatedly rejected a co-worker's advances, and police say it cost Nicole Hammond her life. She was killed in the parking lot outside the warehouse where she worked.
Police in St. Cloud say angry text messages sent by a co-worker just hours before her death led officers to the man now charged with killing her.
If there is one thing that we have learned in these cases so far, it's that women can make it as crystal clear as possible that they are not interested, and some men will continue to persist and push even further. In this case, the victim was a 28-year-old woman from Minnesota named Nicole Hammond, and the man that she was trying to ignore was one of her own co-workers.
It was just as employees were arriving to work at this St. Cloud business Monday morning that the unthinkable happened. 28-year-old Nicole Hammond allegedly killed by a co-worker in the parking lot. alleging the suspect, Michael Carpenter, may have been upset after Hammond rejected his workplace advances. A criminal complaint saying the two exchanged text messages the night before the murder, in which she told him she didn't want him to touch or manipulate her, and asked that he not make things uncomfortable at work.
For an entire month leading up to this tragedy in October of 2022, Nicole had made it perfectly clear to her coworker, 36-year-old Michael Jordan Carpenter, that she wasn't interested in him. She had repeatedly rejected his advances, and yet he continued to try to pursue, even making comments that made her feel awkward while she was at work. On the night before she was ultimately killed, Nicole thought she had finally gotten the message through to Michael that she wanted to be left alone. Her firmly worded text made it clear that she wasn't going to put up with being treated like this any longer. She was aware that Michael was probably not going to take her rejection well. In fact, she even told one of her coworkers that she believed he would be mad at her. The next morning, she had barely even stepped foot out of her car after arriving at work when Michael approached with a firearm. He fired the weapon at her neck, eventually killing. When paramedics arrived, the young woman was lying on the ground in a pool of her own blood. She was already beyond help. After killing Nicole, Michael fled the scene, but was later tracked down by law enforcement. While he didn't directly confess to the murder, he did tell the cops that he fled because he was so traumatized after seeing Nicole's dead body. He was arrested and charged with her murder. One of the most frustrating and heartbreaking parts about this story is that so much more could and should have been done to protect Nicole from this man. Her coworkers allegedly were aware that she was being harassed by him and that he had a temper. Why didn't someone step in?
Nicole always had a smile on her face, and anybody that had any association with Nicole, they couldn't help but like her.
As they all wonder how, if at all, this could have been prevented.
Quite honestly, it's my worst nightmare. It is. It's my worst nightmare.
Everyone, be safe out there. And remember, if there's someone in your life who refuses to take no for an answer, make sure that you reach out for help immediately. Do whatever it takes to make sure that your voice is heard. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.